Here's a hot take. Digital footage doesn't look digital because of the sensor in the camera. It looks digital because everything is too perfect. Here's the thing with modern films and modern digital. Everything is perfect. Everything is perfectly always sharp and focused. Everything is crystal clear and crisp. There are perfect shadows, perfect contrasts, perfect white balance. Everything from like a technical standpoint is perfect. While actual film is not perfect. It's softer, it has some grain, it has some damage potentially, and it is imperfect. But that's what makes it beautiful. Now you might say, yeah, but all of those perfections are because of the new sensors, because the new sensors are super sharp and super crisp and super clean. And yeah, they are, but I think that's a good thing. I think sensors being so advanced and so good and having such a high dynamic range is a good thing because that gives us more options and more flexibility to utilize that, but not to make it even more sharper and cleaner. But the sensor is just one side of the story. Lens choice is a game changer. Now, I'm not saying that you should get a loan so you can rent out top-of-the-line Hawk anamorphic lenses every time you want to shoot a film and then be in depth for the next 5 years. I'm just saying that a lot of modern films are shot on modern lenses, and especially indie films are shot on photography lenses. And the thing with photography lenses is they are made for photography. They are made to be super clinical, super sharp, to have like perfect pinpoint accurate autofocus, because for photography sometimes you really need that super clinical, like super sharp look, which then paired with the modern sensors make everything on video look kind of too digital, too perfect, almost even sterile. And on the contrast, you have cinema lenses. Cinema lenses often have specific looks to them. They maybe have some orange hue or green hue, or they have kind of a wonky soft focus or something of that nature, which if you were to buy a new photography lens and it has a green tint, you would probably return it and be like, hey dude, what the fuck, this lens has a green tint and this like focus is super soft. But the character of those cinema lenses is what makes them, you know, actually have character and be different and interesting. And then you as a director of photography can choose different and specific cinema lenses that have different artifacts and effects that suit your film the best. So maybe you want that yellowish hue and that's why you go for that specific cinema lens. And of course, on the other side of just technical standpoint, cinema lenses have, you know, clickless apertures, so you can change apertures in the middle of the shot really smoothly. They have a really smooth focus roll-off, which is really great, but they also need a focus puller then. But they give you some of the options for specifically video instead of just photo. A lot of people nowadays, especially with social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and things of that nature, are chasing the sharpest footage, the most amount of detail in the footage, the clearest and highest resolution of the footage possible. And that is phenomenal. That is great that we are at the level of technology that it can really allow us to get such high levels of quality and sharpness and such like fast autofocus lenses and things of that nature. That is phenomenal. But it's not really helping the cameras or the digital cameras look less digital, because when you combine super autofocus, sharp, clinical lens with already really good, sharp sensor, it just makes everything look so digital, so flat, and so, you know, clinically clean. But the people who want the less digital look shouldn't be chasing the max amount of sharpness and the most amount of detail and the highest resolution, because film didn't have the highest resolution, didn't have the most amount of detail, and it wasn't always the sharpest because sometimes the focus puller missed the cue and the focus was just a little second too late. But that's what makes it perfect. Those imperfections make the film look the way the film is supposed to look. So you can't really have both. You can't have a really super sharp, high resolution footage that doesn't look super digital. You can meet somewhere in the middle and get a bit of both worlds. But if you want one completely, you can have the other completely, and that's my opinion, because film has some of those artifacts that are just kind of wiped out because they are imperfections. One big point I would still like to really focus on is the fact that lighting is one of the things that matters the most. Even if you have a photography lens, lighting is what can make your footage look and feel less or more digital than it actually is. Because you can have the oldest, most vintage looking lens, but if you light everything super evenly and put that lens on a modern sensor, it's still not gonna look too beautiful. It's still gonna have a bit of that digital artifact feeling. Because sure, maybe before, when the cameras didn't have such great dynamic ranges, you had to light everything more perfectly and you have to light everything a bit more and a bit more evenly because the cameras just didn't have the dynamic range to process so many like shades and specters of light. But now that the cameras have such beautiful and large dynamic ranges, I think it's the best times to start lighting everything with a lot of contrasts. Leave the crushed blacks, because we finally have the cameras that can show all of that dynamic range and not struggle. So why not utilize that and not light everything perfectly? Like, dive into the contrasts, especially if it serves your story well, if you want to portray something with that type of lighting. And then I think the footage is going to look a lot less digital. Another thing I'm going to touch up really briefly on is color grading, because you can do a lot of sharpening and a lot of noise reduction nowadays in DaVinci Resolve with like so many AI enabled features, and it is fantastic because it allows you to do that. So when you're doing like a commercial for a client and you want to denoise the fuck out of it, you can. That's phenomenal. But I don't think that a shit ton of denoising is needed for something like a movie, or you don't need to sharpen everything in a movie, because those kind of soft spots and imperfections is what makes it look perfect. Also, you don't have to lift all of your shadows, because it's not going to look good. Leave those shadows where they are, even if some shadows are crushed. But I think the contrast is what makes it look less digital, because back then you just couldn't, plug your film strip into DaVinci Resolve and do like, oh, denoise, because that wasn't the thing back then. So if you're looking for less digital feel, you probably shouldn't be doing it now. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it at all, because too much noise will look bad and distracting, of course, and too like dark shot is gonna look also bad and distracting, and it's not gonna pull you into the story. What I'm saying is not to push it with those advanced tools that we have now, because just because we have them doesn't mean we have to use them all the way. And the last thing I would put shoulder to shoulder with lighting is set design. It's also one of the most important things that you can do to make your shot look less digital. And I know it's not even in the camera, it's not even in the lens, it's not even in post-production. It's literally what you do with your frame, because if your like shot and frame and background is too clean and everything looks perfect, how are you gonna like interpret that this mom is struggling with her job and juggling 3 jobs and getting kids to school if the apartment looks absolutely perfectly clean? You're not gonna read into that. I think the production design should lean more into the mess and the chaos and like spaces looking actually lived in instead of too perfect, and just more set design to get more like interesting contrasts and shadows on the wall instead of leaving everything minimal and perfect, because I think leaning into those contrasts and shadows and everything, as I've said before, is what makes your film look visually interesting and automatically kind of gives it that less digital feeling. So if your footage looks too digital, it might not be your camera or your sensor whatsoever. It could be your lens, if you're using a photography lens that has like too fast, too clinical of an autofocus and is super sharp. It could be bad, or not even bad, but literally too perfect lighting that makes your footage look kind of flat. Or it can be lack of a set design, because everything just looks too clean and too perfect and not lived in. Because perfection is not what makes films look beautiful and cinematic. It's the imperfection, but it's intentional imperfection that makes it look so special and so memorable and beautiful. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. If you did, drop me a like and a subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at full.frame.production, because there I post behind the scenes of my work as a production company here in Croatia, and I will see you in the next one.